Well, welcome everybody to your support in action, HIV/AIDS advocacy through treatment, testing, and services. I hope you're all enjoying your summer. It's wonderful to be sharing this lunch hour, or perhaps it's a coffee hour for some of you on the West Coast, but to be sharing that with you today. For those of you I haven't met in person or in one of these Zooms before, I'm Tom Viola, the Executive Director at Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS. And I am very excited to be sharing this with all of you and to open our virtual office doors for a conversation focusing on, as I just mentioned, HIV/AIDS advocacy through treatment, testing, and services, all that you make possible with your very generous support and donations. So today, we're going to hear from three remarkable organizations that Broadway Cares just recently sent grants to as part of our national grants program. And you will learn how your support translates into all of the work that they do in three areas across the country. So we'll be joined by Broadway Cares Major Gifts and Plan Giving Officer, Nick Mayo, to moderate this conversation. So let's not waste another minute and get the show on the road. Our first guest is joining us from Prep for All, based in New York City, where he's been the executive director since November of 2022 and has led the organization's fight for a national PrEP program. His advocacy has grown from his personal experiences with HIV. When he was 25, he was diagnosed with HIV while serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine. When he was dismissed after testing positive, he worked with the ACLU to successfully overturn the Peace Corps' policy. It was an extraordinary victory. He followed this by pursuing further advocacy in the field of HIV/AIDS, working as a case manager and prevention specialist in rural Colorado before deciding to pursue a master's in public health at Columbia University. He was honored by Pause magazine as one of the top 100 HIV/AIDS activists in the United States. Please welcome from Prep for All, Jeremiah Johnson, and our moderator, Nick Mayo. Hey, Jeremiah.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Nick. It's great to see you.
Hey, Jeremiah. Where are you zooming in from today?
I am in a fashionable WeWork booth here in Manhattan, where we do a lot of good policy advocacy remotely at our organization.
A prideful one at that.
Yes. Trying to be very seasonal in terms of all of it.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us. I'd love to just sort of jump in and ask, I think that we have assumptions that people have knowledge, but some of us might have varying degrees and understanding of what PrEP even is. So if you could just take a moment and tell us, what is PrEP?
So PrEP is the use of certain antiretroviral medications that can also be used for treatment of HIV, but to use it as a prophylaxis to help HIV negative individuals stay HIV negative. It's actually been FDA approved since 2012, so we're just about to come up on 11 years of it. And it's incredibly effective. It's upwards of 99% effective in stopping acquisition of HIV sexually. And so it's an incredibly powerful tool that should be changing the game more than it is, but unfortunately we're having a lot of trouble getting it out to the communities that need it most.
Tell me about that struggle. Can you elaborate a little bit on the struggle?
Absolutely. So, the challenge that we're seeing within the United States in particular is that certain communities are getting access to PrEP, and other communities are being almost entirely left out, and actually headed toward 11 years of PrEP. I think a lot of people are really surprised at how stark those disparities are. So if you live in New York, you probably have a very different experience of PrEP. You think it's widely available, everyone's talking about it, like it's this thing that's just sort of a part of life for a lot of, in particular, white, gay, male communities. But if we look at the statistics from the CDC, we're maybe getting PrEP to 11% of Black individuals who are most in need of access to PrEP, which is insane. It's such a small percentage. Maybe 20%, 21% of Latinx individuals, 10% of the women, the cisgender women who could most benefit from PrEP, less than 1% of people who inject drugs who could use access to PrEP. So in terms of who's getting it and who isn't, they're sort of, it's a tale of two cities. You know, it's really two totally different worlds in terms of PrEP's access right now.
That's alarming. That's news to me, and it's incredibly alarming. I want to just also sort of open the door and windows to the virtual office. If any of our guests have questions for Jeremiah or Tom or myself, please utilize that raise your hand button. We'd love for this to be a shared conversation. So those of you who are joining us, please feel free to use the raise your hand and ask questions of Jeremiah, Tom, or myself. Tom, I'm curious.
Jeremiah, could you give us a little bit of history of the genesis of PrEP and how it sprung up? PrEP for All?
Yeah, so PrEP for All was founded in 2018 by a large group of individuals who, you know, were themselves PrEP users, the vast majority of them, who were really frustrated that PrEP was not being utilized more widely and was still so difficult for people to access. And PrEP for All was actually the first organization back in 2018 to call for a national PrEP program, which is much of what I continue to work on these days, where we believe that there should be a cohesive and well-funded national program to ensure that we're filling in all the gaps in terms of PrEP access for all of those different communities. Some of where that conversation really had to start back in 2018 was around the price of the medication.
Mhm.
With the price gouging of Gilead Pharmaceuticals, which held a monopoly on PrEP at the time, you were seeing it costing $2,000 a month for the list price. And so while we wanted to get federal investment for a national PrEP program, one of the first obstacles was going to be getting that price, because it's hard to get Congress to invest that much money into that sort of a program. And so some of the notable things that we've been working on over the years is we actually were successful in pressuring the US government to sue Gilead for infringing on US patents for PrEP. What you may not realize, and what all of us may not realize, is that we paid for the research for PrEP. The lowball estimate for taxpayer investment in PrEP was $143 million in that research that Gilead had nothing to do with. The high end estimate is closer to $500 million. Since then, Gilead has raked in billions of dollars infringing on US patents that actually the CDC filed because of that research. And so PrEP for All was really instrumental back in 2018 to get the government to sue Gilead. Right now, we're running up in some challenges in that case. Unfortunately, a jury didn't see eye to eye with our argument, but we're continuing to fight the fight in terms of all of that, to have Gilead held accountable for all of that price gouging and to try and claw back some of that money, upwards of possibly $3 billion, to invest that in a national PrEP program. And so that's a lot of our history, and sort of in recent years, we've really been trying to focus on additional pathways to try and get that national PrEP program through federal investment.
So these wonderful people who are joining us today, who are stalwart supporters of Broadway Cares, what they in the room have ownership of this advocacy. So talk a little bit about what that means to have the support. What does the support go to directly? How does this go? How does their support come to action? So talk a little bit about the action.
So I can't express enough gratitude to Broadway Cares and to everyone who supports you guys. Broadway Care, so before I worked at PrEP for All, I actually worked at Treatment Action Group as well. And you guys are such a unique unicorn of a foundation in a world that's hard to get funding these days, particularly post-COVID. You know, the world of HIV and public health funding has changed. And a lot of times an organization that's working on sort of transformational policy advocacy, it's not always easy to find funders who are willing to step up, in particular when we have strategic moments where we just need a little extra money to help get us to invest in additional consultants, to invest in mobilization, to invest in campaigns, to go out and raise awareness of key issues of how we can push back against pharmaceutical price gouging, how we can get the White House and Congress to act on a national PrEP program. You know, this organization, you know, or if the lights go out, you know, extra, you know, investment. you guys really step up. Broadway Cares was the first foundational funder for Prep for All, and in many ways, I don't think we would exist without you. So our successes are your successes. They're the successes of your donors. And I'm proud to say, you know, one really momentous success that we had last year was that we caught the attention of the Biden administration, which actually included a call for a national prep program in their FY23 budget request, a 10-year, $9.8 billion request for a national prep program that they're calling the Prep for All to end the HIV epidemic initiative. And so in many ways, we all own this. It comes from the funding that you guys have given us. And we still have a lot of fight to go to turn it into reality. But we're incredibly grateful for everything that you do.
Well, thank you, Jeremiah. We're very proud. We're very proud of the work that you have done. And it was very clear when we all met initially back in 2018, the energy and the motivation and the smarts that you brought to how you could move this forward, which would then basically affect how people could be delivering services through the other 473 organizations that we fund, thanks to the generosity of so many donors, many of whom are here today.
Absolutely. And you know, and at the end of the day, that's what we want. We're going to hear, you know, I think from some direct service providers who are working incredibly hard, but the work should be easier for those individuals. We shouldn't leave the people who are fighting so hard having to navigate Byzantine coverage systems, fragmented systems to get PrEP to, you know, the people who most need it. And so that's what we're fighting for, is to make that fight just a little easier for everybody.
And I assume that PrEP is covered by, you know, by insurance plans. It's certainly Obamacare and the work plans. I mean, that this isn't something that they're resisting, is it?
Well, we're actually in a time of sort of unprecedented challenge against PrEP coverage. So some people on here may have heard of the case called Braidwood v. Becerra out of Texas. And I know we have a lot to get to, but I encourage people to look into that. It's actually threatening the ACA mandate for preventive care coverage. And we already were seeing insurance companies resistant to covering PrEP. So even though the National PrEP Program, we're often talking for uninsured and underinsured individuals, there is a coordinated attack from fringe, you know, conservative extremists on coverage for insured communities as well. And right now that case is making its way through the conservative Fifth Circuit Appellate Court down in Louisiana. It may go to the Supreme Court, which is challenging, which is why it's even more important that we exist to keep that fight going and to make sure that we're paying attention to that very active challenge.
Even though the use of PrEP actually saves them money down the road.
So, you know, much of this is the legacy of the price gouging. You know, many of these plans, you know, put up barriers to cover PrEP because at $2,000 a month, it wasn't the same type of cost-saving intervention. Now we have generic competition, which has brought it down to less than $20 a month. But sometimes when these things get locked in because of price gouging, it takes the work of advocates to go out there and ensure that those policies change.
Well, thank you, Jeremiah. I know we could talk about this for the entire hour, but let's get to our second guest. Our second guest joins us from Howard Brown Health, based in Chicago, Illinois. She joined Howard Brown Health in 2008 as its director of geriatric medicine, and then became chief clinical officer in 2011. Her medical practice focus includes LGBTQ aging, HIV medicine, health promotion, and interdisciplinary medical care for populations at risk. Joining her is the associate director of social services at Howard Brown Health. She joined Howard Brown in 2014 and oversees Ryan White case management. She has spent her career working with people living with HIV, starting 11 years ago as a Ryan White medical case manager in Columbus, Ohio. Please welcome from Howard Brown Health, Chief Clinical Officer, Dr. Magda Houlberg, and Associate Director of Social Services, Kat Ross. Welcome, Magda and Kat.
Hey, Magda. Hey,
hello.
Kat.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Kat, you have a killer background. I love that.
I can thank my Howard Brown Health communications team for that.
Good job. So we just heard a little bit about wonderful pieces of the puzzle about advocating for prevention. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on at Howard Brown, what's going on in there, Chicago, and in what ways you and your work is advocating for access to testing or treatment? Talk a little bit about what's going on in your community.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. We are finding really still recovering from access issues that people have had during COVID. So we have lots of patients that we're getting back into care for HIV care so that they, as many of you know, it's really important to stay on your HIV medications so that you remain undetectable, both for forward transmission of HIV infection. So if someone is undetectable, they can't transmit HIV, but additionally, it's really access to life-saving HIV medications that many of our patients are still struggling with getting back economically from recovering really economically from COVID-related interruptions in their employment and really getting back into medical care in some cases. So we were very fortunate to receive the support from the foundation to be able to offer a lot of services to people living with HIV during COVID that allowed them to shelter in place, that allowed them a lot of life-saving supports, really basic things like food and shelter were a huge concern. But we're still seeing individuals that have, through the chaos of COVID, really fallen out of care or needing to get back into care so that we can make sure that they have sustained access to their medications. So I think that's one of the things that we're seeing is that while it looks like COVID's gone, a lot of our clients as well went through a lot of trauma with this. So many of the things from an aging perspective is people are like, this is not my first epidemic that I've been through. So a lot of our patients and clients were like, not the first time I've been in a worldwide epidemic. And this feels very familiar in some ways to a lot of individuals who are living with HIV in terms of the struggles of getting access to care. So
I think it's not only getting them back on their medicine, but keeping them on their medicine. And everyone in this room can sort of own that work together. Your support is getting people back on their medication and keeping them on their medication. So that's super specific. I also just want to remind everyone in the virtual audience, please, if there's questions that you have of Magda or Kat, feel free to use the raise your hand button on the bottom and chime in. We'd love to hear from you if there's any questions. Kat, talk a little bit about some folks who you're coming up in contact with.
Sure. Yeah, so during COVID, I think the beauty of the Broadway Cares funding that we receive is that it's so low barrier, right? So oftentimes funding structures have really specific eligibility criteria that folks have to jump through a lot of hoops to try to gain access. And so we were so fortunate to be able to offer folks, immediate food delivery. So Magda was talking about, during COVID, so people could shelter in place, and during MPV too. So we were able to get folks Instacart gift cards so they could have some choice on the groceries that they got, or we were able to get them, same day food delivery for folks who maybe hadn't had food in 24, 48 hours. Stabilizing people's housing before they were able to get their COVID economic payments through the government. So sometimes folks, if they hadn't filed taxes, there were things that our case managers had to help kind of work out the kinks in the system to help people access that money that they were entitled to. And in the meantime, their landlord is expecting them to pay their bills, their utilities need to stay on. And through the support through our patient assistance programs, we're able to do things like that, even down to things like getting someone a bed. Getting someone an air conditioning unit, if for medically sensitive patients who don't have access to central air or don't have the money to pay for an air conditioning unit, that's a really big impact that we're able to make, especially around these summer months. Even to really small things like a hip kit, like when you get a hip replacement, you have to get a little thing with like a shoehorn and stuff like that. It's $30, but some of our patients don't have $30, and so through programs like this, we're able to help them access a lot of different types of needs because of the flexibility.
That makes perfect sense. And one of these things, we talk about food all the time, and I think everyone realizes that the medicines will truly not work unless you have access to healthy meals. So all of these pieces of the puzzle come together to advocate for treatment of your community.
We've also taken pride and actually made a commitment to the flexibility of our grant making, because we want to make sure that the onus, the work can be done without us adding more work to you just being able to access the money that makes this possible. And we'd rather throw a wide net that perhaps brings a few people in that might questionably be there than to throw a very tight net and miss many people.
I 100% agree. If there's, 1 out of 10 that maybe didn't need it badly, but we have 9 people who needed it badly and didn't have to jump through a bunch of hoops, that's the work we want to do.
Magda, what is fueling you these days for this work? Have you had some one-on-ones with clients that have really, what's fueling you in your days getting through this hard challenge?
Sure. I think, what I've always, in working with older adults, and most of my older adults, or maybe probably half of the older adults that I see as patients are living with HIV or have been for a long time, is really, I'm always surprised about how much stigma plays such a huge role. So I'm still seeing individuals who are 65 or 70 years of age, who maybe knew about their HIV status for a while, were worried about knowing bad news, meaning just didn't go to the doctor because they're worried about learning about, or being just afraid of what people will think, afraid of the stigma around HIV, and still seeing people coming in with advanced stage. And that's really, one of those things where it's really gratifying to be able to pull people into care and give them everything that they need. And really that's one of the things that I think makes me really excited to come to work. And it's really a privilege to be able to work with individuals. I've seen just this past month, patient who was literally 100 pounds, really should be about 160, they should weigh about 160. They're coming in 100 pounds, really just, life really just got out of control, for a long time. They, and really being able to see them even gain weight, gain access and strength. So they're coming in with really an adult, with a walker. And then over the course of several months of being on HIV medication, being able to come in without a cane, being able to come in and really be, and have more energy. So that's just, it's a huge privilege in medicine, because like a lot of the work you do doesn't always seem to make a difference sometimes in terms of treatment. So they're in geriatrics particular, because you can't cure anything. So in geriatric medicine, a lot of it, you're not going to cure a lot of these things. So we're not going to wave a magic wand. But what we can do is really help people with function. We can help people with their spirit, help people overcome isolation and depression and anxiety, and these types of things that I think people are really still reeling from COVID. And we've seen in HIV medicine in particular that we have a way, a lot of our systems that support people living with HIV are very good at supporting individuals who have really complicated needs. So you're going to have to be creative. So yes, so I have a lot of freedom in my role, or as a physician. We do home visits, so that's been really fun for me. So in situations where I want to figure out really what's going on with an older adult living with HIV, arranging for a home visit, being able to see them in their home is really amazing for me. And I think for them too, because you just get a completely different understanding of the person as a patient, and that's something that I think is really exciting. But I'm still in wonderment about, when I started at Howard Brown about 15 years ago, we were still seeing, I guess it was just pre-ACA. So before being able to get any kind of insurance coverage for anyone, almost a lot of the patients we were seeing coming in were in advanced stage and were not doing well. I've seen a fair amount of, even up to 15 years ago, a fair amount of individuals who lost their lives, through not having access to medical care. So it's amazing to see kind of the turnaround over the years. And I've also been privileged to be around for PrEP. So being able to see that come into play and being able to see undetectable as untransmittable. So being able to really relieve a lot of the stress and guilt that people felt, or the fear that people felt in having relationships with, so it's really amazing to me to see that progression of the science. So it's like really the medicine and the humanity of it that really fuels me. But so yeah, it's pretty miraculous, honestly, I have to say. But yeah, the patients are amazing. The patients, the things that they do, the creativity that they have, and the strength that people have is just unreal. It's unreal.
And all of these things are actions to advocate and take the stigma away. So, right, if you're doing a home visit, that's actively destigmatizing. You're going and visiting this person in their home. So all that the support of everyone here in this room is making that possible, which is to provide that necessary treatment and advocate for individuals and destigmatize along the way.
Well, it's also it's interesting to be involved at both ends of the spectrum too, because we're talking to Magda and Kat about helping particularly older adults who are living with HIV, at the same time that we're working with Jeremiah and Prep for All, trying to make sure that a younger generation doesn't get into the position that those adults are in today.
Exactly. Well, Magda, Kat, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. If you don't mind, pop into the virtual green room, and we'll see you at the end of the discussion.
Great. All right, our next guest was brought on in 1988 to lead the 13-person behavioral health organization known then as Montrose Counseling Center. She transformed that small agency with a $385,000 budget into the multi-service LGBTQ community service that exists today, with an annual budget exceeding $6 million. Her background as an anti-violence advocate led her to found Texas' first domestic violence, sexual assault, hate crimes specific organization for LGBTQ survivors. Her PhD from the University of Texas of Public Health lends a holistic view of service to her work in the community. Please welcome from the Montrose Center, Executive Director, Ann Robison. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you.
Hey, Ann. Zooming in from my home state. How's it going in Houston?
Hot.
How's that affecting your clients these days?
Well, we do more telehealth, and it does create a lot of transportation issues because the transportation system isn't great here. Everybody drives, and if you don't drive, it can take you all day or half a day to get to an appointment, and you have to transfer a couple of times, and it's very difficult for consumers that really don't have the physical ability to withstand that heat and be out in it. I mean, we have cooling centers that the city puts up, and somebody who has to spend the day getting to and from an appointment, it just is doomed.
Of course. So, as Tom mentioned in your introduction, you've been at this since 1988 in the state of Texas. Talk about some of the unique challenges that's provided for you over these years.
Dear. So we do a lot of what Kat described, but we do it without Medicaid expansion and with attacks on our community. I mean, Houston is a fairly liberal city, but we operate under statewide rules and regulations and laws that are not friendly and quite oppressive. And so, like I said, we've got a 25% uninsured rate in Texas. And so scrambling to help people get the resources that they need to stay healthy, even when they make an effort to do it, let alone people that we have to, really work to keep in care, it's not easy.
I would imagine. Talk about some of the services that are provided there at the Montrose Center.
So Broadway Cares does support our case management services, and that's kind of another word for service linkage or individual advocacy. But we also have a very robust youth program, a senior housing program. We have mental health and substance use disorder services. We do outreach, testing. We have a reentry program to help people who are getting out of prison or jail that are HIV positive. We do recovery support, and we do a lot of financial assistance, particularly in housing and utilities, because Houston Texas had a very affordable housing market for a long time. And since COVID, it's exploded. And we have to do a lot of housing subsidy, but it's also now difficult to even find housing that is affordable.
And tell me a little bit about that transportation program, which really caught my attention, particularly as I imagine that might be something that's hard to get funding for.
Yeah, so there is a public health system, public transportation system. There's light rail and buses, but for HIV positive folks, there's also, we use a lot of Lyft and Uber because they need that door-to-door service. And there's a Metro Lyft, which is also door-to-door, but you have to be pretty severely disabled to be able to qualify for that. But Ryan White pays for some of it, but getting people to their doctor's appointments, to their case management appointments, and even just to the pharmacy and to the grocery store can be difficult, depending on where they live and how close those services are. And what we're seeing with a lot of our consumers, and this is one of the reasons we built our low-income senior housing project, is people are having to move further and further outside the loop, which Houston is 50 miles across, and it can take half a day to get across town with the traffic. But if they move outside the loop, the caregivers out there and the neighbors out there may not be as supportive and welcoming to someone who's gay or someone who is HIV positive as they might be in Montrose.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm just going to jump in here with something. You're our most recent grantee. We've known you not as long as we've known folks from Prep for All, or certainly the Howard Brown Health. And what I'd like to do here, since your grant this round was significantly less than those other two organizations, that in honor of all of our donors who are on board here today, in honor of them for making so much that we do possible, we're going to send you $10,000 as soon as this week for that transportation program. Because
Wow.
particularly over the summer, it's going to be essential.
Yes, thank you. And you have supported us during natural disasters, though, too. We had some money during Harvey.
Well, let's not wait for the next one. Let's just do that.
But thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And thank you so much for being here and for the work you're doing and the challenges that come with that in your particular area. And I didn't even think about, the sprawl of Houston and how large it is. And then, certain caregivers in certain areas outside of Houston not maybe turning down an HIV positive client because they didn't feel comfortable, or turning down a gay client because they didn't feel comfortable. So that specific regional challenge that you have, and the donors here in this room ensure that those folks there in Texas don't have to, tolerate that no, that there is someone there to help them. There's a ride into town where they can be to community, they can get to their doctor's offices. So thank you for all the work you've done throughout all the years. And thank you everyone here for making sure that that's possible. I would love to invite some of our folks. Mary Beth, I see you have your hand up. One of our guests has their hand up. I would love to invite everyone else back. Magda, Kat, Jeremiah, let's come back and have a shared conversation. And Mary Beth, I'm sorry, I saw your hand raised. It was right as we were making the transition into Anne. So Mary Beth, why don't you unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question of one of our guests.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. I think my question's for Jeremiah. I really don't know much about PrEP, and I was just wondering, is that recommended for people that are in long-term relationships or basically single people?
So it's really available for anybody who feels that they're an ongoing risk for either sexual or, through sharing intravenous drug equipment. So for some people who are in a long-term relationship, they may determine that this is a layer of protection that they need for themselves. A lot of different relationships have different dynamics. And so I think it's important that we make it available to everybody. So we really base it in terms of, do you believe that, you may be experiencing some sort of exposure? And that's the recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for the question, Mary Beth. And Jeremiah, I also realized that you squeezed this into a window and that you have to depart at 12:45. So if you just need to sign off whenever you need to, please feel free to do that. I know you have another Zoom to be on.
Thanks, Nick.
So, we sort of started having this conversation with Kat and Magda, but I'd love to hear from everyone, like, what's keeping you up at night? What are the things what's keeping you fighting in your communities for the work that you're doing? What's the thing that that gets you going in the morning, gets you advocating? Jeremiah?
Thanks for the question. I mean, I think one of the unique aspects of an organization like Prep for All is so many of us have been personally touched by these issues. Tom, you read some of my bio, and, I tested positive for HIV back in 2008. And at that time, I would have given anything to have had an option like PrEP available to me to help me avoid the virus, to be able to connect with my community, to connect romantically, to connect sexually without having to center a virus, and all of that. It takes such an enormous toll on our communities. And so the fact every time I see those statistics that there are still young kids these many years later who are not getting access, may not even know that this is an option for them, it makes me incredibly sad, and it enrages me, because we should do better. We are an incredibly wealthy nation. We have been talking about equity in terms of HIV/AIDS for decades, and yet we are still not getting there in terms of PrEP. So that's a lot of what gets me going, and I think it's a necessary part of this advocacy, because I think sometimes when you talk about it from a policy perspective, you could feel detached from it. But when you know people who are seroconverting and becoming HIV positive because they can't access PrEP, it completely changes the perspective on it.
Thank you for sharing that, your why. And I'm also so remarkably impressed by 1988 in Texas. What was your why? I mean, you could have sat back and done nothing. What was your why, and how have the people in the room continued to be the fuel for you to do that amazing work? What was your why?
So I had lots of friends who were HIV positive back then, and back then there wasn't much, treatment, and there was certainly before there were the good drugs, as we call them, and I just wanted to do more. And being in Houston and being able to have a comprehensive program for the LGBTQ community, that certainly HIV is a very large part of our early times. I mean, we were founded before HIV, but we were one of the first 3 organizations to do anything in Houston. And it's just important to me to make a difference, and to be able to see the people that I help and that we help every day. And that was just more than possible here.
Important work. I feel like everyone in this room, we all have our stories, our whys, right? Why here, why now? And they're all personal. And I love that we get the opportunity to share this virtual space from different parts of our country with different struggles, all with the same sort of fighting spirit to advocate for our communities, to advocate for those to live long and healthy lives, to advocate to live without stigma. So we all share that. Magda, what's keeping you up at night, or where's your why right now?
For me, I think I really wanted to, one thing I really love about the work that we do is the feeling that people can kind of come as they are, so that they don't need to hide who they are. They don't need to feel ashamed of who they are. That part, the fact, I guess I feel like the US is filled with shame. Shame, it seems like, it feels like that's like the primary motivator for people, either, or they think it's effective as to try to get change to happen, is for people to shame each other. So I think for me, that's what I really value. And I think the overwhelming need. So clients and patients have many needs. So it really is, it's really a call to serve. And I do feel like we really make a difference. And I hear it every day and I see it every day. Do we do everything perfectly? No. Do we do the best we can the day we can do it. But I do feel like that's patients having a place to come where they don't feel judged, for me is really, really huge, just because I feel like I see it everywhere. I just see it as like a way that people, I don't know if it's unique to the United States, but it's it turns out that it isn't a very good motivator. It doesn't really help people make change in their life and the way, and being able to offer something else or some other choice, I think is really empowering for me.
I think when you shared earlier about your patient coming in at 100 pounds after, denying themselves treatment for circumstantial reasons, and then watching that person come in that form, we think of HIV and AIDS as those as the images of the height of the crisis. But the fact that those images are happening right now in Chicago, those images that we see, and we see so many of the horror of HIV and AIDS in that time, is happening now still. So reprogramming our brains, right? So I'm grateful that you shared that was occurring. Kat, tell me a little bit about your why and what's keeping you up at night.
Yeah, thank you. So when I think it was in the intro that I said I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I was a medical case manager working in HIV case management there. And we were also fortunate enough to be a Broadway Cares fundee at the time. So I have a lot of experience seeing the impact that these dollars make to the community. And because I've been in my career only working in the field of HIV, 10 years or 11 years is a lot of time in terms of how long we've been dealing with HIV as a country, and to see the progress that like Magda was talking about, that, we have a lot of single pill options for everyone. And, the idea that, Uber has come out since I started in my career, and we can have a lot of flexibility to get people to their appointments. It was especially helpful during COVID, but this money has made a huge impact even prior to that. I think about our seniors. I've been in the field for a while and had the privilege of watching people age with HIV. And something I can think of is maybe a lot of folks don't know that when you get subsidized housing, they let you know that, and they kind of expect that you're going to move on the first of the month. So there's not a lot of consideration about, do you have a current lease? Can you afford to move this month? Do you have savings? Probably not, right? Because you're qualifying for subsidized housing. So the ability for us to be flexible and be able to pay that first month's rent or to pay move-in fees, like to get people into long-term housing for older adults where they can have that socialization and community built into their housing. That's one of the more impactful things that I remember from one of my clients that happened in the last couple of years, was we were able to move him from chronic homelessness into an older adults community where he could live independently and affordably. And we wouldn't have been able to have that flexibility and expediency that was needed to get him into that housing if not for funders like you all. So thank you.
I hope that all of our guests here today feel ownership of that care. You talked about these resources that we have that we didn't have 10 years ago. Bye, Jeremiah. I know you have to pop off. Thanks,
you. Jeremiah. Good to see you.
Jeremiah.
Thank you again.
But you talked, Kat, about these resources. We have resources now, Uber to help someone get to a doctor's appointment. But with those resources becomes a responsibility for us to make sure that those resources are available. So everyone here in this room is responsible for utilizing those resources, these new things, and making sure that your clients and your communities have access to those resources so they can live long and healthy lives. Whether it's a ride outside of the loop to Houston or in the loop or in the Chicago area, these resources you are making possible with your support. I want to be super respectful of your time. I know you have lots and lots of good work to do and things and people to serve. But I just wanted to say personally, before I hand the mic over to Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and share so generously. I really appreciate it. And now I'll hand it back to Tom.
Sure. Well, again, thank you, Jeremiah. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Magda and Kat. This has been wonderful. Thank you to all our donors who I can't see on this Zoom, who I know make all of this possible. I just want to really say how much I appreciate the collaboration and cooperation that it takes from all of us to sort of make this happen. And it really is a comfort to know that we walk the same path towards some kind of renewal and commitment together. So thank you all. Thank you for joining us today, and have a great July 4th.
Thank you.